Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg joins me now. And it's great to have you here, sir. Just what was your reaction to this breach of extremely sensitive defense information?
It was shocking. And I got to say, all the things that I've seen happen in the last few weeks, it's taken a lot to feel genuinely shocked. But this is genuinely shocking. We're talking about incredibly sensitive, highly classified information that they didn't just discuss on an unclassified system. They sent war plans to the wrong guy. Now, they're lucky, and we're lucky, that that wrong guy was a responsible, patriotic, ethical journalist who just had on this program who knew not to publish anything that could put people's lives in danger. But I got two questions on my mind. One, what if this had, in fact, gone to somebody else? I mean, somebody who could plausibly be in some of these people's cell phones. I don't know, the Chinese ambassador or Russian negotiator. And the other question on my mind is, how many other times has something like this happened? This is the one that we know about, but how many other times could they have screwed up like this in a way that puts American troops and families in harm's way?
Yeah, is your concern that if they were texting about this and had this group chat, that maybe there are other encrypted chats about this using Signal, an app that anyone could download, that anyone can use if they're inadvertently added to it, like this was?
Yeah. The whole point of classified information systems is to keep classified information on them. And by the way, I don't know everything about how Pete Hegseth's computers work, but I know this. In my experience, both in the cabinet and as an intelligence officer, you would have to go out of your way to take classified information and move it into an unclassified system. I don't know if a lot of folks understand how this works, but it's not like there's a computer where you might get an unclassified email and a classified email in the same inbox. They're not even the same computers. By design, it is very difficult for information to move from one system to the other unless somebody goes out of their way to do that. And, I don't want to speculate on how the FBI will respond to this or how Congress will respond to this, but I know that it was drilled into us back when I was an intelligence officer that if you ever took top secret information, moved it over to an unclassified system and disclosed it, that would be a crime. I mean, I can't tell you how much this was drilled into us when I was in the military. So much so that I would have bad dreams when I was a junior officer about accidentally maybe bringing in my cell phone into a classified area where you were supposed to physically check in your cell phone and not even bring it into that space so that if there's some listening device, that information couldn't possibly get out. And by the way, I've got to zoom out and make sure everybody understands why this information is classified. It's not just classified because it's interesting or because it's special. By definition, when something is highly classified, it is highly classified because if it got into the wrong hands, it could harm national security or get American troops killed.
Yeah, well, and just in terms of how this is typically handled and the fact that it was in this group chat that obviously he was in and no one noticed he was in, you said maybe FBI investigations, congressional investigations. Do you think that federal laws were broken here, whether that be the Federal Records Act, given everyone knows Signal is set to delete? And as he reported, this was set to delete, meaning there is no record of this conversation after it expires after a while. Or do you believe this violated the Espionage Act?
I would have very real concerns about violations of both of those laws. And remember, some of these same people suggested that others should go to jail in the past for far less. Now, this will be a test of integrity for the FBI, which is ordinarily responsible for counterintelligence investigations and investigating the mishandling of classified information. It's also a huge test for Congress. It's a test for congressional Republicans who, if they have any integrity, know that this is a serious matter. Now, we've already seen a lot of them rushing to make excuses for this, but this is incredibly serious stuff.
President Trump, as you saw earlier, was saying he wasn't aware of this report. We're since told he's been briefed on it, but he reposted something that Elon Musk wrote earlier, kind of mocking all of this by making fun of The Atlantic. He wrote, "Best place to hide a dead body is page 2 of The Atlantic magazine because no one ever goes there." Trump reposted that earlier. Do you see that as making light of what has happened here?
Yeah, because this is all a game to them. Nobody in Donald Trump's family is on a ship in the Mediterranean. Nobody in Elon Musk's family is at risk from the kinds of economic or security harms that are going on here. They think all of this is a joke or a game because these are incredibly rich, powerful men who, frankly, don't have to worry about the kinds of things most Americans do. And look, this is part of a bigger pattern, right? The sloppiness and the incompetence, whether it's firing the people who were in charge of keeping our nuclear weapons safe, apparently by accident, and then scrambling to hire them back on, whether it's sending an email to try to buy out air traffic controllers in the middle of an air traffic control shortage, and then scrambling after a plane crash to say, oh, that never applied to them, whether it's that Doge site, their so-called wall of receipts, thinking that they were proving that they saved the taxpayer $8 billion with a B, not realizing that the contract they were talking about was $8 million with an M, which means they were off by 100,000%. And now this incredibly grave and serious matter of taking classified information about American battle plans involving American troops and randomly sending those battle plans to the wrong guy. If they don't understand the seriousness of that, then they don't understand how their jobs affect the lives of ordinary American people. And as an American, having the most powerful people in your country not take their responsibilities seriously can be lethal. You know, every day I was in Afghanistan, I knew that I could die because of an intelligence failure, that if certain information about what I was doing got into the wrong hands, that could cost me my life. But I also knew that everybody in my chain of command, up and down, from the gunny sergeant sitting next to me in a vehicle, to the colonel, to the then Secretary of Defense and President of the United States, took my security and the security of all of our troops seriously, took the responsibility, the life and death responsibility they had seriously, and would keep me safe.
Do you think someone should be fired over this?
Absolutely. I mean, if I made a mistake like this as a lieutenant, I would be probably not just fired, but probably indicted and tried and maybe in prison. And the idea that, you remember, these guys love talking about merit, right? We hear a lot about this alleged principle that they're hiring people on merit. I think, there's some questions there. I mean, our current Secretary of Defense hadn't shown a lot of evidence of, running a large organization, or let alone running a large organization well. And he got put in charge of the largest organization in the United States of America and the most important organization in the world, which is the U.S. Department of Defense. And if there's not accountability for a screw up like this, especially from a president who used to fire people every day on television for sport, what are we even doing here?
Pete Buttigieg, thank you for joining and thank you for your time tonight.
We begin tonight with a question. How on earth did this happen?
This is an extraordinary, potentially dangerous, and without a doubt embarrassing breach of national security.
A journalist was inadvertently included on a text message chain in which the president's national security team was planning an attack on Yemen's Houthi rebels.
Then, on the day of the attack, with the journalist still included in the text message chain, the Secretary of Defense spelled out exactly how it would play out 2 hours before it did.
This all happened on an encrypted text messaging service called Signal, which is not approved for sharing classified information.
Ed O'Keefe is at the White House with more about the security breach and the president's reaction tonight. Ed?
Good evening. The senior officials on the group text debated whether or not the U.S. should strike Houthi targets and swap details of the airstrikes. The details so sensitive, the reporter who accidentally received it all opted not to publish them out of concern for national security. The U.S. bombed Houthi rebel positions in Yemen on March 15th in response to the group's continued attacks on commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea and missile strikes against Israel. With classified details of the U.S. attack plans were first shared 2 days earlier with Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. He'd been added, accidentally, to a group chat of senior administration officials on Signal, invited by National Security Advisor Michael Waltz.
I've never heard of anything quite like this.
In all, 18 people were in the chat, including Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard.
People have devices that are extraordinarily convenient, and government officials are just like you and me. They like convenience. They're just like you and me. They sometimes send text to people they didn't mean to send text to. The consequences here are a lot higher for that sort of thing than in regular civilian life.
Goldberg watched on his phone as the group debated striking the Houthis. And then, on the morning of the attacks, Hegseth shared operational details about the forthcoming strike, including the timing, the targets, and the types of weapons used. Once the strikes concluded, the group exchanged emojis in celebration, flames, fist bumps, and American flags. Sharing top-secret details over Signal likely violated the Espionage Act, according to CBS News national security consultant Sam Vinograd.
Operational plans related to the Houthis and strikes in Yemen more than likely are classified or at least operationally sensitive. So it'll be important to see whether the Department of Justice opens up an investigation into a potential leak of classified information.
Goldberg's article first published on Monday while the president was holding a cabinet meeting with most of the people on the text group.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine.
And Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, what's the White House saying behind the scenes?
The press secretary says tonight, John, that the president has the utmost confidence in his national security team, including National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, whose office admits Jeffrey Goldberg shouldn't have been on the text chain.
Ed, you've covered the White House for several years now. Have you ever seen a lapse like this? I mean, how big a deal are we talking about here?
Oh, this is a big deal, Maurice, because this is the kind of internal conversation that normally happens in the basement behind thick doors in the Situation Room, far away from reporters ever go. And the reason they happen in a room like that is so that they can be protected from foreign interference or spies. And that's what has Democrats, Republicans, and intelligence officials in this town and across the country concerned that if they're discussing this kind of information in an unclassified setting, what else might they be discussing?
Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thank you, Ed.
National security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is at the Pentagon. So, Charlie, tell us more about Signal here. This is the text messaging app the national security team was using.
Yeah, so Signal is a messaging app similar to WhatsApp, but officials tell me the rules are black and white. It is strictly forbidden to share classified information like this on an unclassified system like Signal. There are specific secure systems and specific devices for sharing classified information.
Charlie, they talked about a target package. What is a target package?
Yeah, John, it's essentially what to hit in what order. Sending out warplanes, including the precise timings of airstrikes and the targets they're hitting, puts aircraft and pilots in danger. The United States doesn't want adversaries to know when it's coming and exact locations of the target list. The Houthis do have a missile force and have shot down American drones.
It's really remarkable. Probably the most sensitive information we have in the armed forces are pending military operations. And in this case, we're talking about the lives of Navy and Air Force flyers. By the way, we also ought to assume that Signal has been penetrated by many intelligence organizations, to include the Russians and the Iranians. So you're basically putting the lives of U.S. service people at risk. You're also displaying to the Houthis what targets are after, and so they can take measures to disperse or avoid the attack. It's a sense of arrogance. And by the way, I also think it's an attempt to avoid accountability under the Official Records Act. These people have been routinely using Signal, I'll bet you, for many other types of sensitive discussions, knowing they wouldn't be filed and available for researchers or investigators in the coming years. It's really a disgraceful situation. If that had been a bunch of majors and lieutenant commanders coordinating an attack, they'd all get fired and probably be subject to criminal prosecution.
Happened today is an utter and monumental screw-up amidst the highest level operators in the United States government. Let's start with the fact that classified information was being discussed on a Signal chat, not classified means, but a Signal chat that could easily be compromised. Add to that they were using a feature called disappearing messages, which is a violation of U.S. law that even classified information and communications should be preserved for history. This is a quote from the actual article. At 11:44 a.m., the account labeled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a team update. Now, the author says, I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent texts. The information contained in them, if they had been read by an adversary of the United States, could conceivably have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel. What I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this Signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. Who was involved in this? The list is outrageous. We have the U.S. National Security Advisor on this text, the head of the CIA, the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, political advisor Stephen Miller, the head of the NSC. This is utterly outrageous, potential violation of U.S. laws, and truly an indication of the unqualified individuals that are leading our nation at this difficult and dangerous time. There must be accountability. I repeat, there must be accountability. Because the questions are, is this the first time they've had such signal chain conversations? Or is this standard practice amongst the most high-level national security personnel of the Trump administration? Congress must know. The American public must know. So what are you going to do, Republicans who control the House and the Senate? Republicans that I've seen so far have failed to hold one oversight hearing when it comes to serious issues affecting our country. Not one oversight hearing. But if this was a Democratic president that did this, they would be calling immediately for resignations, for criminal investigations, and most certainly there would be congressional hearings. Are you going to give a pass to your president? Are you going to submit yet again to his political pressure and put party before principle, put party before patriotism, to put Trump before the national security interests of the United States of America?
Can you update us on the latest efforts to go after lawyers and law firms that have taken up cases that perhaps the president or his DOJ consider frivolous?
So on Saturday, the president issued a memorandum called Preventing Abuses of the Legal System and the Federal Court. Mm-hmm. And this was President Trump saying that his administration, the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security could decide on their own if legal cases filed by certain lawyers or law firms were frivolous. And then what's extraordinary here was that they could then enact sanctions against the law firm. And one of the key things that came out over the weekend was there was this criticism of a law firm that sort of settled with Trump, Paul Weiss. They were one of these law firms that were targeted. And it wasn't just that, you know, the Trump administration is talking about taking away Paul Weiss's federal contracts. They said that any company that continued to work with Paul Weiss would have its federal contracts taken away. And the head of that law firm said that he settled with the White House because they were going to be forced out of business. Steve Bannon said last week the goal is to bankrupt law firms that challenge this administration. No president has done this. Ronald Reagan didn't do this. George H.W. Bush, George Bush didn't do this. And so it's just unprecedented and alarming to a lot of lawyers and legal experts.
Apps like Signal are not government-approved platforms to transmit classified information. You would think folks would know that. And the fact that defense officials are conducting an intelligence operation on an app is dangerous. Meanwhile, Donald Trump claims he had no knowledge of these events.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic.
That was his takeaway.
Earlier today, The Atlantic magazine released a stunning and alarming report about the accidental leaking of the Trump administration's coordination on classified military operations targeting the Houthis in Yemen. According to the report, a member of the press was somehow added to an unsecured text chain with the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the CIA Director, and other national security officials. The text chain was not a secure conversation. The app used is not approved for discussing classified military operations. Nevertheless, on this text chain, conversations went at length about imminent military operations, including specific targets, weapons, and attack plans. These text messages very likely included classified U.S. intelligence. And the entire time, nobody seemed to realize that a private citizen without security clearance had access to this conversation. Mr. President, this is one of the most stunning breaches of military intelligence I have read about in a very, very long time. What we have here are senior U.S. leaders, including the Vice President and Secretary of Defense, having classified discussions of military action over an unsecure app. It's bad enough that a private citizen was added to this chain, but it's far worse that sensitive military information was exchanged on an unauthorized application, especially when that sensitive military information was so important. If these detailed exchanges about coordinating military operations fell into the hands of America's enemies, it could get people killed. It could severely harm our military. It would put America's national security in danger. This debacle requires a full investigation into how this happened, the damage it created, and how we can avoid it in the future. If our nation's military secrets are being peddled around over unsecured text chains, we need to know that at once, and we need to put a stop to it immediately. Every single senator, Republican and Democrat, and independent, must demand accountability. If a government employee shared sensitive military plans like this, they'd be investigated and face very harsh consequences. Again, this kind of carelessness is how people get killed. It's how our enemies can take advantage of us. It's how our national security falls into danger. If you were up in arms over unsecure emails years ago, you should certainly be outraged by this amateurish behavior. I ask that Leader Thune and my Republican colleagues work with Democrats right away to hold a full investigation into why these military operations were coordinated over an unauthorized messaging service instead of the secure communications channels funded by taxpayers. And I want to finish with this. When Pete Hegseth became before the Senate as a nominee, Democrats warned that something like this might happen. These people are clearly not up for the job. We warned confirming them was dangerous, that they'd behave recklessly. Unfortunately, we were right. Now we must have accountability, and both parties in the Senate should investigate how this blunder was even possible.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time. Anybody else?
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time. Anybody else?
Oh my God.